Hi, folks, and just welcome to episode 3 of KFIT TV. And we're delighted to have Rob Mulcahy joining us today to share some insights on all things strength and conditioning and fitness for the GAA, amongst other sports. And we'd just like to thank him for taking time out of his schedule. And I'll hand him over to himself to introduce himself to you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I suppose day to day, kind of for the last 4 years, I've been working as a strength and conditioning coach with Clare senior footballers, and in the last year or so, kind of came in with the development squads, so kind of overseeing strength and conditioning on both the hurling and football development squads, and kind of DAs with the under 20s and minor hurling and football as well. So kind of have a role in that sense over at S&C in the county at the moment. I'm also working as a GDA in Clare, so I have a kind of a games administration position as well. And so it's kind of my role is kind of in schools as well, secondary schools, delivering kind of S&C in different aspects, both primary and secondary schools. Prior to that, I worked for Limerick GAA. I worked within the hurling academy. Well, I'm probably 10 years or more working in strength and conditioning. I've worked up in Belfast with Mike McGurn. I worked in Queen's University in Belfast, primarily with Commonwealth and Olympic level athletes there. Prior to that, I was in the UK for a while, so I kind of bounced around quite a bit. I moved to the UK to work and to study when I was in my mid-20s, after I worked here for a bit. So bounced around quite a lot, but found myself back in Ireland probably 2015, 2016, and kind of fell into the GAA. I wouldn't have been a kind of a big GAA man myself. Played a bit, but there's other sports took over for me, and I'm kind of come around, I suppose, 360 now. I'm back working in the GAA full time.
Brilliant, yeah. So a whole wealth of experience there, Rob. Yeah, fantastic. You sure did get around, yeah, to lots of big stuff. I just want to touch on a little bit at the start. Just ask a few questions. I put some feelers into some WhatsApp groups with different groups that I'm involved with: Triathlon Club, Kilrush GAA, and a few other GAA clubs that I got lads to drop into, just to see what they'd like to hear about. And I'm just going to tip out some of the stuff that came back and see how we go from there. One of the things that came back was, and this is something that I'd be very interested in as well myself, it gets earlier every year for the club footballers that want to come back. You know, they're like last year there was teams training in November and December. They had 6 or 8 weeks training done, you know, shortly after Christmas. And just something that kind of crosses my own mind a little bit, that, you know, there's 5 or 6 players on each team that are kind of almost fitness enthusiasts big time, and it's fine for them, but you have a whole group of kind of another cohort of players that are almost outliers. That can they manage that kind of load, or that early coming back? Do they lose interest, or, you know, where do you stand on coming back for a club footballer at that time of year? Is it too early? What would be your thoughts on when they should reconvene? That's considering that the league starts when it's supposed to start around Paddy's weekend.
Yeah, I suppose you have to look at the year in a whole. You have to look at potentially when the season is going to start, how much running time that you will have into that. Like, if you're starting and you mightn't be playing anything for 6 months or so, you know, you just have to be quite conscious of, you know, how engaged players will be to continue training over that period of time, how necessary it is for them to be training for that length of time. But look, I think there should be some form of training all year round. Maybe not collective, but players should be engaged in some form of training. Like in the off season and the pre-season, it's quite an optimal time to focus on general qualities. So, like, if you have guys that have body composition issues that need to be rectified earlier in that season, that would be ideal to come in. Again, from a general perspective, if they need to improve qualities like aerobic capacity, you know, earlier in the season would be like ideal times to do that. But another factor that's massively important is probably the level that you're playing at as well. You know, like if you're playing at a senior club level or you're playing at a junior club level, it's just something to be quite conscious of. How early you start.
Yeah, good point. And the other part of that is something that kind of crossed my mind as well, was from a management point of view and coaching point of view, I suppose one of the big issues that club players or that clubs have a lot of years is trying to get management on board and get selectors on board at club level. And when it becomes an 11-month season, that often becomes a bit of a turn off for guys going, I've got 6 months, but I can't dedicate 11 months to this, So maybe by condensing it and maybe being smarter with it, maybe you would encourage more fellas or more girls to get involved, whatever the case may be, by just having a smarter approach to the season, or as you say, picking your time and working back.
Yeah. Like, I suppose, like, how much time do we need to devote to it, in a very specific sense, and I think people feel that you need to get back earlier to make more gains and more headway, but sometimes less is a little bit more, and we might talk about in a while about the particular situation we're in now with the pandemic and how that's going to influence guys coming back and what they should be doing. But I think when you have a club player, maybe a junior club player, like interest is going to wane as the season goes on. So it's probably important to kind of keep things fresh, keep things a little bit shorter. Obviously, have the adequate amount of time that you can prepare efficiently. But if you're bringing guys in for 6 to 9 months and there's no likelihood of playing games, and they might only play 4 or 5 games in that season, it's quite a hard sell, I think. It's probably different now when you get it an inter-county level, where it is becoming almost an 11, 12 months season. Especially younger guys that are playing maybe at Sigerson, if it's given cup levels, and they're playing maybe under 20s and things. It does become a season that has to be managed and monitored quite a lot. So they kind of almost by default their season becomes a year long. But if you're a club player, you're a junior club player, you're intermediate club player, you just have to be conscious with the cohort that you're working with. That you want them to play, you want them to be interested, you want to be prepared, but again, you don't want to overload them and kind of push them away almost. Like that's probably a big factor to be conscious of. Yeah,
there is a group there that you could very easily kind of turn off if it becomes too much, But I'm just going to read out. I got one question that came back there from one of the Kilrush lads. It came in a 3 parts, so I'm just going to read it out to you a little bit and see. Part 1 was the pandemic will likely mean fixture congestion, and this will lead to an increasing risk of injuries. Like, what's one thing that you would recommend players to do that might reduce that risk of getting injuries? I know it's kind of broad now, but
I suppose within the GA you'd be focusing on what injuries occur the highest. So we'd be looking at things like hamstring injuries. When we kind of look at the mechanisms that cause hamstring injuries, essentially it's not being able to withstand the amount of force that the muscle has been put through, and then that amount of force is exceeded. So, but I think like again, like I suppose it's broad enough that it's not a particular injury. It's injuries in general. Like, I think preparing appropriately, like first and foremost, players need to be at the correct body composition for the sport. They need to be appropriately strong for the sport. So, like, I'd encourage guys to get stronger. Like, there's a mass amount of research about increasing relative strength. The stronger you are relative to your own body weight, the more robust you'll be, and the less likely you are to sustain injury. I suppose that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to mitigate injury as much as possible. Also, if you're looking at like hamstring injuries and hip flexor injuries, it's typically due to a lack of exposure to max velocity or exposures, or like high sprinting. So like there should be some form of exposure to sprinting kind of year round, and obviously plyometrics as well. So like progressively incorporate sprints into sessions. That all of a sudden when you start playing games and training, you just don't start sprinting. And then all of a sudden I pull my hamstring. And why have I pulled my hamstring? It's obviously intuitive enough to say that it's because you haven't been preparing for it. So I suppose advice to guys, we know the season is going to be in the summer, most likely for the club player. So now it's February, so you have ample time to prepare your body for the rigors of the season. It's not just we're going to all of a sudden come back to training and we have a month and then we have to play, which is possibly going to happen. And games are going to be back to back to back. I suppose with the congestion this season and the games that are going to be played, recovery is going to play a massive part. I remember speaking to clubs last year, like when we were putting this scenario, less is more, so I focus on recovering as much as possible between games, especially if we've got Saturday game and then the following week Sunday game and Saturday game. Cumulatively over that month there's going to be a high spike in load. Like, if you take into account that guys will come in, they haven't trained in a game scenario already, that first week is a massive spike in load. So it's just being very cognizant of that. You have to monitor and manage that load a lot. You can't go back in and just train them as if they had always been training, or train them as if we weren't in the pandemic. I think that's an area that clubs kind of fell into last year. They just went back and goes, we'll do it as we always did it. Sessions will be 90 minutes long. You know, we'll try and get everything covered, where you just have to be a little bit clever with keep them on the pitch. You know, like the team that manages to keep their best players on the pitch this season is going to win a championship. It's not going to be the guys that do the most prior to playing the game.
I suppose finding the balance this time of year, so that when you, I suppose, not overdoing it now because you don't have a goal or you don't have a fixture date, but finding the balance that at least when we get back to the pitch, that they're able to train to compete as opposed to turning up to try and get fit, you know, would be, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just going to read you the second part of that. Football is, I don't have time or the patience or equipment to do any fancy strength and conditioning program at the moment. And this is probably a common thing among club players now. But what are three of the top strength and conditioning moves that you might, or strength moves that you might recommend somebody to do at home to keep on top of their strength qualities? I know, again, it's fairly broad. But...
Yeah, like I suppose from my sense, that there wouldn't be three things that you just advise off the top of your head. You know, it's massively dependent on the individuals, dependent on the demands, dependent on the part in the season. Like, you know, I think there's probably a large misconception to what strength and conditioning is. You know, and if it's called fancy, it's almost something that's just extra, you know. But again, like, there's a massive body of research around the benefits of being stronger for the sport, how that affects kind of robustness, how that affects someone's ability to withstand the demands of the game. Like, so if you have a lack of equipment, you know, that's something that's probably is something that you'll have to deal with. But I think exposing guys to things like plyometrics, you know, is a good thing to be able to do if they have a lack of equipment. Again, like increasing tendon stiffness is very important for guys that are going to be sprinting and change direction. But three very particular exercises, to be honest, like it's too vague of something to kind of just throw. I'd kind of be doing a disservice if I said do these three things and they're gonna solve the problem. You know. Yeah,
no, it's great. Another big kind of an issue for early season, you know, again, you find a lot of it with the club setup is that there's a kind of a really kind of a gung-ho approach early in the year, and they'd adhere to the gym program where everyone wants to start, and it becomes 2 or 3 nights a week for a couple of months, and then you get to the pitch or teams or players get back to the pitch, and those strength qualities that were developed over the 2 or 3 months seem to be completely forgotten about, and there's no emphasis put on them. And, you know, it's something I'd always stress to guys, like, that it's important that you, like, I suppose there's a little call there for some sort of microdosing or strength at the pitch or something, but is there, like, it's really a bit of a disaster, lads, doing a kind of a stringent 2-month gym program before the season and then going to the pitch and forgetting completely about it for the next 3 to 4 months, really.
I suppose that everything is periodized, you know, and depending on how advanced or inexperienced the athlete is, you periodize differently, so you plan things differently. But essentially, we go in the gym to develop qualities, and those qualities depend on the sport. So, like, you know, you want guys that have a certain body composition for the sport, you want guys at certain strength levels for the sport, and you develop them, and you need to maintain them as much as possible, that you don't lose those qualities as the season goes on. Now, inherently, you will lose certain aspects of those qualities, because when you don't train something, you lose a little bit of it. But it's important to try and maintain those qualities as much as possible. So, like, with things like strength, you'll maintain a certain level of strength by simply sprinting and jumping within the sessions. So again, that's something that will always be kind of factored in for us. We'll always factor in some form of strength movements inside the gym that will maintain as much of the strength training, as much of the strength that we develop as possible. As we kind of get to more the latter ends of the season, we kind of get into that kind of maintenance period when we're playing games and things like that. But yeah, like I think strength and conditioning isn't just something that stops all of a sudden just because you go on the pitch. You know, it's something that has to be managed and incorporated when you go into your competitive period. So, like, obviously the volume drops down a good bit, but essentially all it is then, once you're playing games, you're trying to maintain those qualities that you've developed.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. I have another one here that came from a guy has a lot of senior football experience. I won't read out his name or anything now, but I found this one really interesting simply because of who it came from. This is a guy that I'd have thought would have been right on it now, you know. Well, it's interesting to read, but I'll just pop it out to you there. He said, for me personally, I'd like to hear how to become more explosive from using the right weights. And I'd like to hear more about the nutritional side of things. He said he was on a webinar recently on high performance, and they spoke about the 6 to 8 hours that you spend training in the week and the 7 hours sleep a night that you get. And that would together make 55 hours out of 168. So he's talking about the importance of the remaining hours for nutrition, for recovery, for training. And he said, here's what's really interesting here. He said, I can safely say I played senior football for 19 years and I never fueled my body correctly at all. I never had the correct protein intake. I believe 85% of most club players don't understand it, or at least don't apply it. They mightn't be disciplined enough to do that, but that's another story. But if I was to manage a club team in the morning, he said, I definitely have the strength and conditioning coach working on explosive movements and teaching them almost how to fuel their body for that. I know it's a bit... and increasing their range of movement, to allow growth and recovery. And the guy that this came from now, I would have been involved with him a couple of years ago, and I would have thought he'd have been really on that, so it was interesting coming from him.
Yeah, I suppose when you were talking about explosiveness in Gaelic football, for example, they're probably alluding to accelerating, decelerating, rapid change of direction, jumping. So again, it's a quality that needs to be trained. It's a quality that comes along kind of a continuum. So once you develop a certain level of relative strength, we start focusing more on priorities in the sport, which would be explosive strength. So with explosive strength, what we're looking at is what's called rate of force development. So how fast can you move that force, and that's a huge component to Gaelic football. So I suppose to put parameters around it, you'd be looking at moving barbells in the gym, so say squat jumps. You'd be looking to move things very, very quickly with load. So you'd be looking to squat jumps to 30% of your 1RM for reps of maybe 3 to 4 reps. So typically the volume isn't excessively high. The intensity would be quite high. And you'd be looking at maybe if the guys do Olympic weightlifting, you'd be looking at 70% of a 1RM in cleans and hang snatches and things like that as a movement. From that, you'd be progressing on to actually incorporating that quality into training. So if you don't spend a lot of time sprinting and you don't spend a lot of time changing direction, you can't assume you'll just be able to do it when you go on the pitch. That's kind of probably another misconception, is that I'm doing this in the gym, why can't I do it on the pitch? Because you have to integrate it and do it on the pitch. You have to be able to change direction. You have to be able to accelerate, and have to be exposed to those qualities, both from a physiological perspective, both from on the pitch and actually performing repeat bouts of that, and also from a technical perspective. How efficient and proficient are you at accelerating, at decelerating? What kind of positions can you get into when you're changing direction? How good are you dealing with forces? Can you rapidly slow yourself and re-accelerate yourself? So it's probably a long-winded answer for explosive, but again, it's training that quality. As specifically as possible once we get it. From the nutritional side of things, I'm not a nutritionist. I don't really give out too much nutritional advice because it's not the area that I specialize in. But yeah, most guys are very unaware of what kind of requirements their body needs, what they need to fuel with themselves adequately. When we get some of the younger guys coming into the senior team, they're completely oblivious to the amount of food that they need to take in to sustain the amount of training they're doing. And on top of that, the majority of them need to gain an excessive amount of weight as well to just deal with the demands of the sport. And you'd be turning around to guys and telling them you need to eat 3,000, 3,500, 4,000 calories a day. And they're kind of that's too much. But they're probably unaware of that. That's what your body needs. And then within that, obviously, what types of foods your body needs. You spoke about protein. Most guys don't know per gram of kilo of body weight how much protein they need. And that's something that the nutritionist will educate them on, depending on their demands, depending on their requirements. But some factors in that, one of the main things you want to get is obviously, you want to stimulate protein synthesis. You need leucine over about 2 to 3 grams of leucine. So you need to probably get in 1.3 grams per kilo of body weight in protein every single day. That's going to facilitate that protein synthesis, which is important. And research has shown that, depending on the sports, you want to strength-based athletes, they will probably want to get upwards of 1.8 to 2 times, 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So quite a lot of protein. So if you're a 90 kilo guy, I'm 90 kilos, I'll try and get 180 grams of protein a day. Not every day, but like that's just an example because I suppose I predominantly do strength training.
Brilliant. Just a story. I was at a nutrition course there a few years ago, and there was the guy that was lecturing on it was involved with a county team a few years ago, and on the first few sessions, he noticed that lads were coming to the pitch and there wasn't much there. A lot of them were students and stuff, and they were just studying and they were rolling out of bed and they weren't fueling properly. But one of the first things he did, and he told me it was the best thing he did, was he took them down to Cork for a cooking weekend. And I don't know if he took them to Darina Allen or somebody, and they just showed him. They spent the whole weekend how to make, some pasta dishes, how to mix the protein with the carbs to slow it down, and just how. And as a result, he got much better results of training by just actually teaching them the basics of how to fuel, how to mind themselves rather than just rushing straight from work or study to train. I thought it was a great move.
We do that with the academy players. So we have Gráinne Travers who works as a nutritionist, like excellent nutritionist, and she'll do that with the players. Like I suppose pre-pandemic, she'd bring the lads into Caherlone and she'd show them how to cook, and she'd show them kind of what their plate should comprise of, and it's vitally important information for young athletes to have, that as they get older, they're very aware of how to fuel themselves. Like we'd ask guys when they come to training, what have you ate? And some of them be like, I've ate nothing, and you're going into at academy level, you might be going into an hour and a half of a training session that can be quite rigorous. It might be once a week on a Saturday morning, and they're not fueled appropriately for the session. And then subsequently they'll go in, they won't fuel appropriately after the session. I think we all know that, I suppose gains that are made after you train. So how you fuel or how you recover appropriately after training is what really affects your performance. So that person you're speaking about, just simply by going after his nutrition with his players, you'll see a dramatic improvement in their performance. If they're fueled appropriately, if they're recovering appropriately, they'll respond very well to very good nutrition. As long as it's consistent and it's put in place over a prolonged period of time.
Consistency trumps everything, right?
That's it, yeah.
I have a couple of more. I'm conscious of the time, Rob. I don't want to keep you too long, but I have a lot of lads actually. And again, I was kind of surprised at this. I thought we were kind of gone a good bit onto it, but a lot of guys seem to be struggling with the warm-up, pitch warm-ups. A few lads came back to me and said, the warm-up isn't right. We're kind of doing a few laps still, and we're doing this. And almost every team now has someone studying sports science or doing strength and conditioning, and they kind of know. So you can't kind of bluff over them or fool them anymore. They know what's right and they know what's wrong, And they struggle with that warm-up, and the ramp protocol is very simple, and I don't know why they wouldn't even bring in someone just to teach that to managers or coaches or whatever. Very, very simply.
Yeah, I suppose the purpose of the warm-up is to prepare you for the demands of what you're doing. So there's probably no one warm-up that you'll always do. The warm-up is dependent on. So say if I have a session that's going to be predominantly sprinting, the warm-up will have to adequately prepare them for that. If the session is going to be a lot more aerobic based, the warm-up will have to prepare them for that. So like what you said, like the ramp, so you'd have your raise, activate, mobilize, and potentiate, which is quite a really, really simple way developed by Ian Jeffries, like a really simple way of preparing guys for a training session. And you're dead right. It's probably something that every club coach should be exposed to. The days of just doing a little bit, just kind of running around, isn't going to sufficiently prepare you for the training session. And we know like appropriately warming players up has a massive effect on the likelihood of injury occurrence as well. If guys aren't prepared for the session, huge rate of injury incidents as a result, or that there's maybe not a huge incident, but there is a likelihood of injury incidents increasing. So like very, very simple protocol using ramp. Like I use it myself with all our teams, and any guy who comes in and work with us, like I outline what ramp is. For anyone who doesn't know, like raising is just the raise phase. You're bringing it, you're increasing their body temperature, you're incorporating movements that they'll probably see in the game. So some linear running, some ladder running, maybe some slight change direction. Activate is just activating muscles that you're going to utilize in that session. Same with mobilizing, so mobilizing certain muscle groups, and then potentiate is bringing them up to an intensity that they're going to have to perform at in that session. So if it's sprinting, you're going to have to bring them up to an intensity that's going to be maximally sprinting prior to sprinting.
Yeah, and if, just for anyone listening, or maybe for any football coaches listening, I know like club, expenses and funds and things like that, and they might want to have a full-time S&C on board. It would be well worth your while to get an S&C and bring them for 3 or 4 weeks just on a consultancy level, even if you only learn the warm-up off them over the 3 or 4 weeks. Like, your players will really thank you for it. You'll probably get more out of them, and you'll probably get less injuries as well, I think it would be worth their while to do that. There's lots of guys studying out there that'd be more than happy, I'd say, to get a little bit of exposure to a team, and to help out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's probably a small bit of education around those areas would be massively beneficial for any club team, and then probably implementing it as young as possible. The earlier that people are exposed to these things, the probably less pushback there is as they get older. You might have older players that we didn't warm up and we were fine, which is possible.
We had the heater on in the car coming here.
I remember reading a bit of research, like incidence rate of hamstring is quite low when you look at like a large body of people. So like just for hamstrings or injury, for an example, and guys say, I never warmed up and I never pulled a hamstring injury, but that's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at the potential, the possibility of guys getting injured by not warming up properly. And if you take a large enough body of people, someone is going to get hurt. So again, over a longer period of time, if you put all that together, you get more and more injuries. So again, warming up is kind of I suppose a non-negotiable. Guys have to warm up properly, and that goes for gym sessions as well. Gym sessions are probably a little bit harder. Guys just kind of rock up. And I'd be guilty of it myself, I'll rock up and I'll train, and sometimes I'll probably neglect getting my body prepared. But again, I know if I prepare myself properly for my training sessions or the lads in the gym, maybe it doesn't have a massive effect on that training session, but it has a massive effect as things go on. Like they'll recover better after training.
Don't tell anyone that, Rob. Don't tell anyone you're not getting ready. But and definitely what you'll save, what you'll spend on bringing somebody in to teach you to do a warm-up, you'll save later on the physio table for sure, I think. Rob, I'm really conscious of the time. I'm going to ask you one more question. The fella got in touch with me. I'm involved with the West Clare Tri Club here, and we haven't had a race since last year. I'm trying to keep guys motivated. Like, I know you have a background in swimming, but trying to keep guys motivated. Like, it's much harder to keep the endurance guy motivated than the field sport, because our sessions are long. Kind of Sundays we could be gone for 150k on the bike, or we'd be gone for a long time, and trying to do, we can't go anywhere on the bike now, so that's trying to do those long sessions, and we haven't had a swimming pool for 12 months, so we're trying to kind of dry land train and stuff. Any tips on how to keep guys motivated or without a specific goal coming up?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, especially like you're limited massively what you can do. Like, say my sports football, I can bring the ball out the back and I kick it off the wall, and it kind of keeps me a bit sane, and it's, I suppose from a motivational perspective, you just have to look at the long-term thing. Like, we won't be in this forever, and there is certain aspects that I can probably focus on now that would benefit me down the line. I think another misconception is strength training within endurance athletes. Like, endurance athletes need quite a decent level of relative strength. Again, I've never worked with endurance athletes per se, but like, I know like strength levels relative to your own body weight would be like 1.4, 1.5 times, maybe in excess of that for like lower limb squats and things. Obviously a large component on reactive strength as well. So like, they obviously they need to be exposed to things like plyometrics. I think offhand, elite sprinters spend, I think, 0.1 100 second on the ground. I think elite distance runners might spend 20 to 30 100 seconds on the ground. So a huge component on reactive strength. So obviously getting exposed to plyometrics and strength training is something that you could prioritize now in the season, and it gives you a focus as well. It's also impacting on what you're going to do later down the year. It's going to help your performance as you go through the year. So that's probably one thing. Unfortunately, there's probably not too many ways around what you can do from a conditioning perspective. Like, you have your 5k, so can you cycle back and forth and back and forth and back and forth 5k without going outside it? That's possible. Like, so the swimming is probably the hardest one. I know for myself, I'd be still swimming a lot now. If we weren't in this situation, that's probably the hardest thing to overcome. But again, maintaining those strength levels will have a positive impact as you come back.
Brilliant. Well done. Thanks, Rob. And just to mention there that the GAA have a rollout. Rob is doing 3 sessions a week with the primary and the post-primary, and they're getting absolutely huge numbers. So if you've got anyone listening that might be interested, make sure and get on that, because it's a great way of getting access to good technique and proper training rather than just jumping around. So it's fantastic. Gives you good access to them too. You know that you mightn't get that kind of access to that many numbers. You know, it has its advantages in one way, I suppose.
Yeah, like that was one thing that hit home. Like the first session did the best, finished up with 4,500 views or something, and we kind
of
there's not that many kids probably in Clare almost that are at that age grade. So yeah, it's definitely something I'd say we'll probably utilise as we go forward, that we could deliver sessions through that medium, you know, and it's probably not as perfect as physically being there and coaching through different movements, but you know, it's definitely quite a good way of getting across to as many people as possible, you know. So it's been, we've been very happy with it. The uptake, especially primary schools, has been very good. Like from my side of things, it was just basically doing a lot of fundamental movements, you know, jumping, landing, hopping, some animal-based movements as well. So hopefully people got something out of it.
Brilliant, yeah. And again, thanks a million to Rob Mulcahy for his time and his strength and conditioning for Clare GAA. And thanks for your time, Rob.
Thanks a million for having me, Kev.